Here you are, Bukalaj. Vesna's flaw is mine, and you're mine.
Hello and welcome back to another video where today we're going to check out the Thaumaturge, a new isometric RPG that's kind of similar to Disco Elysium but with combat in it as well. It's fully voiced narrative driven RPG that takes place in early 20th century Poland where player choice matters. I'll be splitting the video in two halves though. The first half will be benchmarking the game on PC, which settings are most demanding, FSR, DLSS, XeSS, frame generation, and the second half will be more of a first look at the game. My thoughts, the combat, characters, the world, a sort of a preview, if you will. Anyway, let's start with the benchmark. The Thaumaturge is actually an Unreal Engine 5 game, and if you know anything about Unreal Engine 5, is that it is rather demanding on the hardware. Now for this test, I've gone ahead and maxed all the settings out, and we do actually have Lumen in the game, which is used for global illumination. And I wanted us to see what the cost to performance is, because Lumen is actually the most demanding setting in the game. And currently with an RTX 4090, a Ryzen 7800 X3D at 3440 by 1440p ultra wide, we are getting around 105 FPS. There are more demanding parts in this game, like the cutscenes. There is a lot of cutscenes in the game. It's a narrative, kind of like Baldur's Gate 3, the way it tells its story. So if you're not into cutscenes, maybe the game isn't for you, but the story is actually quite good, with interesting characters. However, why don't we turn Lumen off and set GI to screen space and see what we get. And we basically go from 105 FPS to 135. That's a gain of 30 FPS, close to 30%. So that is a very costly setting. Okay, now at a glance you might say, well, it looks the same, and you're not entirely wrong, but there are differences, and what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at that, see how big the differences are. We'll begin here with Lumen turned off, and then Lumen turned on. It definitely looks better with Lumen turned on, like the shadows where the horses are on the right underneath the shed. They definitely look a little more realistic, I would say. Let's try toggling it off and on. Lumen off, Lumen on, Lumen off, Lumen on. If we zoom our camera in, you can tell that Lumen on the right does look a little bit sharper. The shadows do look more realistic, but is that worth 30% cost in performance? I personally don't really think so. There is two more settings that are a bit demanding. Let's take a look at those, then we'll check out the Upscalers. Another setting that can be a bit demanding as well is shadows quality, which is not really all that surprising, but if we go from epic to low, we go from 135 FPS to 150. So that's another 15 or so FPS gain, which is pretty nice. Not as heavy as Lumen, but still a bit heavy nonetheless. And the last setting that I'll be taking a look at, which I noticed the performance increase by disabling, was volumetric lighting. So we went from 150 to 167. That is pretty good. We started at 105. Anyway, let's take a look at the Upscalers now. After we look at the Upscalers and frame generation, I'll be going over on the second half of the video when I look at the game. I'll be going over the performance cost between cinematics, combat, and all that stuff, because the cinematics are actually a bit heavier than what you're seeing now for some reason, but we'll tackle that when we get to it on the second half. What I wanted to show you here is that even without any upscaling, if you look at my character, there seems to be a bit of a trail, a little bit of ghosting that seems to be in the game regardless of whether you're using any upscalers or not. But as you know, upscalers can actually introduce their own ghosting or enhance the ghosting that's already in the game. So that's going to be the context. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the horse's head as it moves from left to right over the grass to examine if the upscalers introduce any sort of ghosting. And we're going to begin with DLSS first. I've actually seen DLSS add a bit of ghosting in some games, but here it actually does a really, really good job. It definitely adds a little bit more detail to the grass, almost like it looks like a bit sharper or better aliased. And the horse, while it's moving around, I don't really see any ghosting. Whereas before there was a little bit, but I think it improved. And the snow too, it looks really, really clean. Let's take a look at XeSS next. With XeSS, I can immediately notice the snowflakes leave quite a bit of ghost trails, and it actually even looks like there's fewer of snowflakes than there was with DLSS and native. The horse, though, doesn't really look too blurry, although there is like a cloud of blur that the horse leaves behind, not so much ghosting, so it's kind of strange. Again, with XeSS, it's kind of hard to judge because XeSS works best on Intel GPUs because it uses the matrix cores, whereas here it's falling on the DP4A fallback. So we're not getting the best quality possible with XeSS. But I would say XeSS is not as good as DLSS. Let's check out FSR3 next. And this game does utilize the latest version of FSR3, including frame generation. Now, immediately, FSR3 definitely hammers the snow the hardest, I feel, because there is ghosting on the snowflakes, but there also seems to be quite a few, much fewer snowflakes, actually, than there was with DLSS native and even XeSS, although it could be maybe similar to XeSS. As far as the grass, it does do a pretty good job. It does look nice and sharp and crisp, kind of like DLSS does. So that is pretty good. In this game, there's not a ton of motion, but I feel this is kind of a fair comparison as far as examining these different technologies. And I'll be doing a side-by-side for you guys as well, so that you can see it for yourself and judge for yourself. I don't know how it's going to come across through YouTube, but I will try. We'll take a quick look at TSR as well, Epic's own Unreal Engine 5 upscaler, and I feel this kind of does the worst job. I mean, the snow is almost completely disappeared. There is a little bit of ghosting on the horse. The image does look a bit soft, and FPS gains are the same, so I would go with FSR or DLSS, and if you have an Intel GPU, go with XeSS. It probably looks better. I wish I had one. I would love to check it out. But yeah, TSR, I would personally not really use it. In this game, though, I think they all do a decent job just because this game, it's not a lot of stuff going on. It's not too crazy, right? It's not like there's a lot of fast-moving images anyway. So I would say they all do a pretty good job. FSR, DLSS, pretty comparable. Let's take a look at the frame generation, though. We're going to begin with FSR3 frame generation here. And from what I've heard is they kind of broke frame generation in FSR3 with the latest update. You can kind of see that on the frame time graph. It's all juddery. I don't know what happened, but this is kind of a similar issue FSR had when they first launched it, so I don't know why it's like this. Like, playing the game, it does feel like a little bit juddery, I guess. I wouldn't use it personally. I wouldn't use DLSS frame generation either in this game, just because I get enough FPS anyway, but I don't know why. As a matter of fact, the Ancient Gameplays, Fabio, did a video looking at this. I watched his video, and he checked a few games that updated the FSR3 as well, and they exhibit the same exact issue with the frame time being a bit jittery. Next, we're going to check out DLSS frame generation. But before we do that, we're going to go back to DLSS quality to see what we get for a base frame rate, which with FSR quality, we were getting the same, 130. And then turn in FSR frame gen, we went from 130 to 175. Now we're going to do the same thing here and enable frame generation DLSS 3. we pretty much go around the same FPS, 175 from 130, 125, so we gain around 50 FPS. Unlike FSR 3 though, the frame time with frame generation DLSS 3 that is definitely a lot smoother, and it actually does feel more consistent, more fluid than it did with FSR. So I hope they fix it. I'm sure they will. This has happened before where, you know, they'll fix something and then something else breaks. So I'm confident that they're going to fix it in due time. But for now, I don't think either are really necessary. Personally, I wouldn't use either frame generations. I think you can just knock down Lumen and you will get very good FPS if you have a weaker GPU, and then you have the upscalers to work with. So I think that about concludes my benchmark view of the game. Let's do a quick look at the actual game and what I think of it, because I do actually quite like it. So let's take a look at that. As far as the actual game goes, it's a more narrative-focused type of RPG than something that has multiple types of classes to choose from, different weapons, items, potions, that sort of thing you normally expect from an isometric RPG. You play a character called Victor that is essentially a demon hunter slash detective with the ability to capture saluters, these evil spirits that will latch onto individuals and influence them to commit crimes, manipulate the people around them, that sort of thing, causing unrest. Each saluter you capture will give you abilities that you can use in conversations and in battle. I'm not a big fan of many cutscenes in games unless the story grabs me, and this story has done that for me. I like history and the many interesting characters that have lived throughout, and right from the beginning you're seeking spiritual healing from Rasputin, a very fascinating character that lived in the late 1800s that was known to be a healer, a mystic, a womanizer, and even devil incarnate by some of his detractors. He went from being a peasant from rural Siberia to an advisor to the Tsar Romanov family. Very interesting character. Highly suggest looking him up if you don't know who he is. But he becomes your companion. And I'm assuming that you probably meet the Romanovs as well eventually, as that's what kind of he was known for. But yeah, very, very interesting. I love the setting of the game and the story so far. Circling back to the performance behavior in the game though, is that you can't really go by 1% lows here, because anytime there's a scene transition or it transitions from cutscene to gameplay, there will be like a stutter, or if you skip the dialogue, that sort of thing. One thing that kind of stood out to me was how the cutscenes tend to be a bit heavier than while you're playing. So right there we were at around 90 FPS, and here we're at 120. But a lot will depend on what's going on as well. Like for example, when we go outside, it's not going to be the same as inside. Now we lost about 10 or 20 FPS. But for this type of gameplay though, the way I'm playing it is I just lock it to 60, and it's perfectly fine for this game. It's that type of game, you know? You're not dealing with fast reactions or anything like that. And for the most part, I'd say it's fluid. It's fine. I don't really have any complaints as far as fluidity goes. It's just that it's a bit demanding. And as we looked at previously, you can gain a lot more performance back if you just disable Lumen or use upscaling, that sort of thing. I think it's fine. You would be able to play this game even on a Steam Deck. As a matter of fact, there is an option for Steam Deck in the menu options. So that's cool. Before wrapping it up, I'll just go over the combat real quick. And it's your standard turn-based combat. This is the first boss fight in the game where you essentially capture your second saluter, Bukavok, and you have to defeat the shadows that he spawns, and that's how you damage its health. You basically have a slow, strong attack and a fast, quick attack. But you also have a debuff that you can use. Right now, I'm using my first saluter, and he has this ability called Focus, where he essentially puts the enemy in a staggered or distressed state, and that gives you access to other stronger abilities, some of which actually heal for part of the damage that you do. And that's very important because, at least so far, there is no items that you can use while fighting. So if you needed health, you can't drink a potion or anything like that. You have to sort of maintain your health by choosing the right abilities to do damage with. which is not really all that hard. I actually killed the boss the first try, barely. Then I tried it again because I was kind of curious to find out how exactly it worked. But yeah, your standard fare. You have debuffs, curses, that sort of thing. So I would say the combat is fine. I mean, it's nothing to write home about. It's not the main focus of the game. I think the main focus is the story and the journey. So if you're not the type of person that is a story, I know there's a lot of people that don't much care for the story. They're more gameplay people. I don't think this game is really for you unless the story grabs you. Because I'm the same way. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of cutscenes in games. But if the story is good, I will enjoy it. It was the same thing with Detroit Become Human. On paper, that game would not appeal to me at all. But I did actually like the story. It was well written and interesting. So it grabbed me and I played it. But yeah. That'll be all for this video though. I wanted to try something a little bit different. Instead of just showing the performance metrics, cycling through resolutions and upscaling options, I wanted to dig a little deeper, focus the first part of the video on the settings, the PC port itself essentially, and the second part on what the game is and my own thoughts. Please let me know below what you think, and if you liked it, please give the video a like and consider subscribing if you want to see further similar content from me. Thanks for watching, and I'm out. Bye-bye.
You lose. You're going crazy again, you blind fool.
A little faith, Thaumaturge. Focus on what's true. My voice is true. I am the truth, you see. Look.